What would you do if the person meant to protect you became the one breaking you down, day after day, in front of everyone, while the one person who could destroy them all watched in silence and waited? This is the story of a woman who was handed a plain dress and told to disappear into the background of her own life. A woman who sat at the far end of every table, absorbed every insult with a bowed head, and was called weak by people who had no idea what quiet strength actually looks like. But here is what nobody in that room knew on the night it all began. The night her mother-in-law stood up in front of 50 of Seoul's most powerful people and publicly dismantled her daughter-in-law over a spilled bowl of soup. Nobody knew who her father was. Nobody knew that a man in a plain black suit, sitting 2 tables away, had spent 3 years keeping a promise that was about to expire. Nobody knew that the woman they were laughing at had been building something in the silence they mistook for weakness. By the time they found out, it was far too late. Stay with me until the very end of this story, because what unfolds across these 25 chapters will shock you, move you, and leave you thinking about it long after the final words. The ending is not what you expect. The justice is not loud, but it is complete. Before we begin, drop your location in the comments right now. Tell me where in the world you are watching this from. I want to know how far this story travels. And if you are not subscribed to this channel yet, hit that subscribe button right now, because we tell stories here that you will not find anywhere else. Stories of hidden strength, quiet endurance, and the kind of truth that always finds its way to the surface. Now, let us begin. The soup was hot when it left the bowl. I remember that detail clearly, the way the steam curled upward before everything went wrong. It was the hand charity gala, the most important night on my mother-in-law's social calendar. The Grand Lotus restaurant had been booked for 3 months. White tablecloths, crystal glasses, 50 of Seoul's most powerful families seated in careful rows. I had dressed that morning in the outfit my mother-in-law, Madame Cho, had selected for me, a pale beige dress, shapeless, forgettable. I understood what it meant. It was the same message she sent every day, just stitched into fabric. My husband, Sung-ho, sat at the head of the table. He was laughing at something a business partner said, his voice carrying the way it always did in rooms full of people he wanted to impress. Madame Cho sat at his right side, where a wife should sit. I sat at the far end, between 2 colleagues' spouses who spoke around me as though I wasn't there. I hadn't slept properly in 3 days. Our daughter, Ain, had been running a fever since Monday. I had sat beside her bed alone each night because Sung-ho had meetings and Madame Cho felt that handling illness was the domestic staff's responsibility, not hers, and certainly not her son's. My hand was trembling slightly as the server set the bowl down. I reached for my water glass. My sleeve caught the edge of the bowl. The soup moved in slow motion. A wide, impossible arc of broth landed directly on Madame Cho's white gown. The table went silent. She stood slowly. I had seen Madame Cho angry many times, but this was different. This was performance. She looked at me with the calm, absolute contempt of someone who has been waiting for exactly this moment. "This," she said, loudly and clearly, "is why women with no breeding should never be allowed into good families." She gestured at the stain on her gown as though presenting evidence. "You are an embarrassment to everything the Cho name stands for." 50 people heard every word. I know because I watched every face turn. I looked at Sung-ho. I don't know what I was hopping for, something, anything. He picked up his napkin, dabbed the corner of his mouth, and said quietly, "Apologise, Mi-Rae." My name in his mouth felt like a door closing. I bowed my head. "I'm sorry," I whispered. 2 tables away, a man in a plain black suit set down his chopsticks very carefully. He had a calm face, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know what to look for. Nobody noticed him. Nobody ever did, until it was too late. People always assumed I married into the Cho family because I was lucky. I let them think that. The truth was simpler and more painful. 3 years ago, I had fallen in love with Sung-ho the way young women sometimes do, quickly, completely, and without asking enough questions first. He was warm then, attentive, the kind of man who remembered the small things. He had looked at me like I was worth looking at. I had believed him. Madame Cho had opposed the marriage from the beginning. I came with no family name she recognized, no corporate connections, no inherited status. She told Sung-ho privately, and not so privately, that I was a pretty face from nowhere. He had defended me then. That version of him felt very far away now. 3 years of marriage had taught me a great deal about the kind of love that erodes. It happens slowly, then all at once. Madame Cho's voice was a steady drip, a comment at every family dinner, a comparison to every woman Sung-ho had dated before me, a constant patient reframing of me as someone less than. The household staff received instructions about my movements. My personal allowance was managed through Madame Cho's account, small enough that I rationed my own meals on the weeks she delayed it. I never complained. I never called anyone. I had one phone, an old model, plain black, that lived at the bottom of my wardrobe inside a folded winter scarf. I had never used it in front of Sung-ho, not once in 3 years. That night after the gala, I sat in the bedroom with the beige dress still on and the old phone in my hands. My daughter was finally sleeping after 4 days of fever. The house was quiet in the particular way expensive houses get quiet, all that space pressing down. My thumb hovered over the screen. There was one unread message, sent during the dinner. The sender's name was simply listed as A. The message was 4 words. I saw everything, waiting. I stared at it for a long time. Then I folded the phone back into the scarf, set it in the wardrobe, and went to check on Ain. But for the first time in 3 years, I didn't put it back because I wanted to. I put it back because I wasn't ready yet. There is a difference. I was learning to tell them apart. His name, in the circles that whispered it carefully, was Chairman An. He was 62 years old. He had built his organization across 30 years from a single import logistics company into something that touched nearly every major industry in Korea without ever appearing in a headline. 3 sitting ministers had taken his calls at midnight. 2 major prosecutors had requested his advice on cases they couldn't crack. He was not feared because he was violent. He was feared because he was patient, and because patient men with long memories are the most dangerous kind. He had one daughter. When I was 24, I told my father I wanted to live as a normal woman. I wanted a marriage that was mine, a life built on my own terms. I told him that if he interfered, if he ever used his name or his influence around my life, I would leave Seoul and he would lose me entirely. I was not bluffing. He knew I wasn't bluffing because I am exactly like him. He agreed. He kept his word for 3 years. He kept it through every family dinner where Madame Cho's voice cut across mine. He kept it through the allowance and the dress and the deliberately assigned seat at the far end of every important table. He kept it through Ain's fevers and my silent nights and the slow erasure of every quality in me that had once made me myself. He kept his promise because I asked him to, and I was the only person alive he could not refuse. But he watched. He always watched carefully from a distance, through people so well placed I never noticed them. He watched because love for a man like my father is not warmth, it is vigilance. The night of the gala, he watched Madame Cho stand up in front of 50 people and systematically dismantle me in public. He watched Sung-ho tell me to apologize. He set down his chopsticks. He pulled out his phone and sent 4 words to the number my mother had given him before she died. I saw everything, waiting. Then he called his second-in-command, a quiet man named Director Woo, and said, "Find out everything about the Cho family, everything. Start tonight." Director Woo was thorough. He was always thorough. By the following Thursday, he had assembled a report so complete it had section dividers. He brought it to my father in the private office on the 14th floor of the building nobody knew my father owned. My father read it without expression, which was how he read everything. What the report contained was not surprising to a man who understood how money moved, but it was worse than expected. Cho Group, Sung-ho's family company, was in serious trouble. 3 failed overseas investments in the past 2 years had quietly consumed their cash reserves. A construction subsidiary was under informal government review for permit irregularities. Sung-ho had been borrowing against assets he did not fully own in order to maintain the appearance of solvency. The company's public face was confident and well-dressed. Its private face was a man standing in water up to his chin, trying to look tall. Madame Cho knew none of this. Her son had hidden it from her completely, which was its own kind of story. But there was more. At the back of the report, in a section marked simply personal, Director Wu had documented a second phone, registered under a company name, that Sung-ho used exclusively for contact with one person. Her name was listed as Clara in his phone. Her real name was Park Jae-yoon. She had been receiving transfers from a Cho Group subsidiary account for 8 months, amounts far too large to explain as professional fees. My father read that section twice. Then he closed the file and said, "Don't show this to my daughter yet. Let her find it herself. It will mean more that way." Director Wu hesitated. "And if she doesn't find it?" My father looked at him. "She will. She is her mother's daughter, and her mother never missed anything." It was an ordinary Tuesday morning. Sung-ho was running late for a meeting. He moved through the bathroom quickly, leaving the door open. I was at the vanity applying moisturizer when I heard his phone buzz on the counter behind me. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't suspicious, or rather, I had trained myself not to be, the way you train yourself not to touch a hot surface. The screen lit up with a preview notification. The sender name read CL. The message said, "Last night was everything. When do I see you again?" I read it twice. Then I looked at my own face in the mirror for a long moment. Then I finished applying my moisturizer. I straightened the counter. I walked downstairs and made Sung-ho his coffee exactly the way he liked it. 2 sugars, no milk, poured at exactly the right temperature. When he came down, I handed it to him. I asked whether he needed me to prepare anything for his afternoon meeting. He kissed my cheek and said no. I stood at the door and waved as he drove away. Then I went back inside, sat at the kitchen table in the quiet house, and allowed myself exactly 3 minutes to feel everything I was feeling. The hurt came first, then something underneath it, something harder and cleaner that I recognized, the way you recognize a word in a language you grew up hearing but were never taught to speak. My father used to call it clarity. When the 3 minutes were finished, I opened the wardrobe. I unwrapped the old phone from the scarf. I typed, "Father, I think I'm ready." He called me back in 4 minutes. I was sitting on the edge of the bed when the phone rang. I answered immediately. His voice was the same as it had always been, measured, unhurried, the voice of a man for whom panic has always been a choice he simply declines to make. We spoke for 13 minutes. I did not cry. I asked questions the way he taught me when I was small: assess, identify, decide. What do I have? What do they have? What is the next right move? He answered each question honestly and completely. He did not soften anything. Partway through, he paused and asked, "Do you still love him?" I thought about Sung-ho's hand on my back at our wedding. I thought about the message on the lit screen. I thought about 5 years of becoming smaller. "That's not the question anymore," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "No," he agreed. "I suppose it isn't." By the end of the call, we had not made a plan. But something had shifted, the way a door that has been locked for a long time shifts when you finally put the right key in. Not open yet, but moving. I told him what had happened at the gala. I told him about the dress. I told him about Aoin's fever and the nights I spent alone beside her bed, and the way Sung-ho had said my name like a sentence being closed. My father listened to all of it without interrupting. That was unusual for him. When I finished, there was a long pause, and then he said, "I kept my promise, Mi-Rae, for 3 years." "I know," I said. "I am going to need you to release me from it." I looked out the bedroom window at the clean Seoul sky. Aoin was laughing at something in the garden below, chasing the housekeeper's cat through the rosemary. "Not yet," I said, "but soon." Madame Cho moved fast when she decided to move. I found out later that she had been preparing her masterpiece for months, quietly, methodically, with the patience of a woman who had spent 40 years getting what she wanted through careful timing. She had identified the solution to her son's financial crisis, a merger with K's Holdings, a company owned by a man named Chairman Park. And the merger came with a condition: Chairman Park had not stated officially, but had made entirely clear through the right conversations at the right dinners. His daughter, Park Min-jae, was available, appropriate, and interested. All that was required was for me to be removed. Madam Cho presented Sung-ho with the divorce papers on a Wednesday evening. She laid them out on his study desk with the same calm efficiency with which she managed everything. This was not cruelty to her, it was simply good household management. She explained the merger. She explained Min-jae. She explained the numbers. Sung-ho, who was drowning in financial guilt and unable to argue against a solution that solved the crisis he had hidden, took the papers. He did not sign them, but he took them. That same evening, I went to his study to leave a document on his desk. The folder was sitting in the middle of the surface, plain white, slightly open at one corner. I read the top page in 3 seconds. I understood what it was in for. I closed the folder. I replaced it exactly where it had been. I returned to the kitchen. I served dinner warmly. I laughed at Sung-ho's small joke about traffic. I asked Awen about her day at school. I was, by any external measure, a perfectly pleasant wife on a perfectly normal evening. But under the dinner table, my hand was gripping my phone until I felt the case begin to crack. I found Attorney Han through a referral from a woman I had met twice at a parents' meeting, a quiet, sharp woman who worked in international law. I chose her deliberately because she had no connection to any firm the Cho family had ever used. We met in a small cafe far from my neighborhood on a Tuesday morning when I had told the household I was attending a wellness class. Attorney Han was small, professionally still, and had the particular quality of very good lawyers. She made you feel that nothing you said would surprise her. I spoke for 20 minutes. She did not take a single note. When I finished, she looked at me steadily and said, "You're describing a husband whose company is technically insolvent and who is conducting a financially documented affair. You're describing a mother-in-law who has had fraudulent divorce papers drawn up without your knowledge or consent. Mrs. Cho, you don't need revenge. You need to let the law do its job." Then I placed the folder on the table. I had been keeping copies of every financial document that passed through my hands for the past 6 months. Sung-ho had given me access to the household accounts 3 years ago without a second thought. He had never changed the passwords. I managed the accounts with precision and kept personal copies, filed neatly in a folder I labeled simply House Admin, and stored in the bottom of Awen's art supply cabinet. Attorney Han looked through the folder. When she reached the 4th page, her expression changed, only slightly, but I noticed. She looked up. "Where did you get these figures?" "I managed the accounts," I said. "He never thought to look." She studied me for a moment, then she closed the folder. "I need to bring in a forensic accountant. Are you comfortable with that?" "Yes," I said. "I've been comfortable for a while. I was just waiting for the right moment." The forensic accountant's name was Mr. Kang. He was methodical, unenthusiastic, and completely brilliant. Within 10 days, he had gone through every document I provided and built a picture that was worse than I had imagined. But that was not the part that mattered most. The part that mattered most was Clara. My father's people had been thorough. Director Wu's report, which my father finally shared with me during a quiet phone call on a Friday evening, told me things about Clara, her real name, her family's business. The failed overseas deal, that reframed everything. She was not a distraction. She was an operation. She had been extracting financial and strategic information from Sung-ho for 8 months and feeding it to her father's associates, who had used it to outmaneuver Cho Group in 3 separate business negotiations. The money Sung-ho sent her was not for love. It was leverage she had built so carefully he never felt the walls going up. My husband had trusted the wrong woman and doubted the right one for 3 years. My father told me this gently, the way you tell someone about damage that has already been done, no point softening it, but no need to be brutal either. When he finished, I was quiet for a moment. "She targeted him," I said. "Yes." "He made it easy." "Yes." I thought about that for a while. I did not feel sorry for Sung-ho in that moment, but I understood him, which is a different thing and sometimes harder. "Where is she now?" I asked. That, my father said, is the interesting part. Clara had been meeting with Madame Cho. She had been introduced as a PR consultant who could help manage the company's public image. Madame Cho, who prided herself on reading people, had not read this one at all. The same arrogance that blinded her to my worth was now blinding her to the knife at her own table. The house was full of plans that week, and none of them knew about each other. Madame Cho was building her merger. Sung-ho was managing his guilt. Clara was managing both of them. Attorney Han and Mr. Kang were building a legal case in a small office across the city. My father was in the background, moving quietly. And I was in the middle of all of it, making dinner, helping An with her reading homework, folding laundry, appearing entirely as expected. 3 preliminary legal motions had been quietly filed by Attorney Han, procedural steps, invisible to anyone who wasn't watching for them. Mr. Kang had finished his initial review and requested 2 additional document sets. I provided them from the art supply cabinet the same night. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, Mr. Kang called. His voice, usually flat and professional, had a quality in it I hadn't heard before. "Mrs. Cho, I need you to come in. We've found something." I went the next morning. He laid it out plainly, no softening, just facts. There was a second layer beneath the financial irregularities I already knew about. Someone had been authorizing fraudulent fund transfers, moving money in ways that would constitute serious criminal fraud. The authorization signatures on those documents bore my name. I was sitting very still. "Your name appears on 11 documents over the past 14 months, Mr. Kang said. "If these were presented without context, you would appear to be a primary actor in the fraud." I looked at him, but I never signed those. "No," he said. "I don't believe you did. The question is proving it." I already knew what I was going to say before I said it. I kept copies of everything I signed, photographed before and after, time-stamped. He stared at me for a moment. "You photographed them." "I grew up," I said carefully, "in a home where documentation mattered. Old habit." Attorney Han examined my original copies side by side, with the fraudulent documents filed under my name. The differences were small, a different pen pressure on the signature, a margin alignment that was slightly off, one document number that had been altered by a single digit. Small enough that a casual review would miss them, precise enough that a forensic examiner would not. The forgeries were good, but they were not perfect, and whoever commissioned them had made one significant error. They had used a notary stamp on the divorce documents that turned out to be fraudulent as well, traced to a solicitor who had handled private legal work for the Cho family for 20 years. Madame Cho had been preparing for every eventuality except one, that I had been preparing too. I spent one night sitting with all of it, the forgeries, the divorce papers, the affair, the 3 years. I did not sleep, but it wasn't an anxious night. It was the kind of wakefulness that comes when things you have been holding separately finally fit together into a single shape, and you can see it whole for the first time. In the morning, I called Attorney Han. "File everything," I said. She paused. "The forgery evidence." "All of it. The forgery, the fraudulent notary stamp, the financial documentation. Everything we have." "This will move quickly once it starts," she said. "Are you ready for that?" I thought about the beige dress hanging in my wardrobe. I thought about the word apologise in my husband's mouth. "I have been ready," I said, "for a long time." My father arrived in Seoul on a quiet Monday. He did not announce it. He checked into a small private hotel in Mapo under a name nobody would connect to him. He came with Director Wu and 3 other men who looked like retired civil servants and were not. Within 24 hours, he had arranged 2 meetings. The first was with a senior prosecutor named Chief Prosecutor Shin, a man my father had known professionally for 15 years, a man of real integrity who had simply never had enough evidence to move on certain matters, and had always known that one day the right information might arrive from an unexpected direction. The second was with the editor of one of Korea's most respected financial newspapers. My father did not ask either man for anything. He simply shared information, documented, accurate and devastating. The Cho Group's true financial state, Clara's family connections, and the information pipeline that had been running for 8 months. The fraudulent documents bearing my forged signature. He presented it the way a man presents a meal to a guest. I thought you should have this. I thought you would want to know. What you do with it is entirely your decision. He said this, and he meant it. He did not need to issue instructions. Men like Chief Prosecutor Shin and editors with 30 years of reputation know what to do with truth when it is placed cleanly in front of them. He left both meetings without shaking hands. He was back at his hotel before dinner. Director Wu asked, "Now we wait." My father sat down and poured his tea. "Now Mi-Rae works. We've done our part." Sung-ho came home distracted on a Tuesday evening. He had spent the afternoon with a colleague he trusted, one of the few remaining ones, who had taken him aside quietly and said there were rumors about the company's finances, about Clara's family and their connections to the failed overseas ventures, about where certain funds had gone. He drove home in silence. That night I watched him from the kitchen doorway without him knowing. He was standing in the entrance hall with his coat still on, not moving, just standing. He had the look of a man doing rapid calculations and not liking any of the answers. I finished washing the dinner dishes and went to check on An. She was already asleep, one arm thrown over her favorite stuffed bear, her dark hair spread across the pillow. I stood in her doorway for a while doing what parents do, watching a sleeping child breathe and feeling the particular gratitude that comes with it. When I came back down, Sung-ho was still in the hall. He saw me and something moved across his face, not guilt exactly, but something adjacent to it, a kind of recognition. I said goodnight and went upstairs. I heard him go to his study. I heard the drawer open, a long pause. Then I heard him say something under his breath that I couldn't make out from the hallway. He came to the foot of the stairs. "Mi-Rae, the folder that was on my desk, did you move it?" I looked down at him from the top of the stairs. "Which folder?" I said. He stared at me. I held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds, then turned and went to bed. The divorce papers had been with Attorney Han for 9 days. He came to me 2 days later. Not angrily. Sung-ho was not a man who confronted things angrily when he was frightened. He came quietly, in the afternoon when An was at school, standing in the kitchen doorway with the look of a person who has been rehearsing a conversation and knows it is going to go badly regardless. "Where are the papers?" he said. "With my lawyer," I said. He stared. "You have a lawyer?" "Yes." "Since when?" I set down the cup I was holding and looked at him properly. "Sung-ho, I have been the person in this house who managed the accounts, handled the staff, maintained your mother's social calendar, cared for our daughter through every illness alone, and absorbed 3 years of being made to feel like a burden. Did you genuinely believe I was not paying attention?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "I have always been smarter than you thought I was," I said. It was not unkind. It was simply true. You just never looked. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a bus moved along the street. The refrigerator hummed. Then his phone rang. He answered it automatically, the way people do when they are grateful for interruption. I watched his face change as he listened, the remaining color draining slowly, his jaw going tight. He lowered the phone. He looked at me, and for a moment I saw the man he had been 5 years ago, the one who had looked at me like I was worth looking at, and I felt the ghost of what that had once meant. "There are investigators at the company," he said. "Financial Crimes Unit." "You should go," I said. He went. The raid was reported on the financial wire services at 2:47 in the afternoon. Attorney Han called me within minutes. I was sitting in a cafe near An's school, waiting for pickup time, and I listened to the update with my tea cooling in front of me. The Financial Crimes Unit had arrived with proper authorization and began methodically removing hard drives from the Cho Group offices. 3 partner companies had already suspended joint operations pending review. The company's stock, which had been fragile for months, dropped sharply in the hour following the news. Clara, I was told, had boarded a morning flight out of Seoul. Her phone was going straight to voicemail. She had left no forwarding address with the company she was nominally contracted to. I thought about Madam Cho calling Sung-ho every 3 minutes. I thought about Sung-ho sitting in a conference room watching strangers carry out the servers that held 3 years of his decisions. I thought about the white gown and the word apologise, and the 50 faces in the Grand Lotus restaurant. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was more like the moment after a very long storm when the noise finally stops and you can hear your own breathing again. Then Attorney Han said, "There's something else. The investigators have listed you as a named signatory on some of the fraudulent transfers. They want to speak with you." I had been expecting this. "When?" I said. They suggested tomorrow morning. "Fine," I said. "I'll be there." I paid for my tea, picked up An from school, and took her for ice cream on the way home. I arrived at the Financial Crimes Unit the next morning at 9 o'clock. I came with 2 lawyers, Attorney Han, whom they expected, and a second lawyer, a tall, quiet man named Attorney Park, whom nobody in that building had seen before. He spoke briefly to the lead investigator in the hallway before the interview began. That conversation lasted 4 minutes. When the investigator returned to the interview room, he was considerably more careful than when he had left. I placed my documentation on the table. Original copies of every document I had ever signed in the Cho household. Time-stamped photographs taken on my personal phone, before signing and after, filed chronologically across 14 months. A forensic handwriting report comparing my genuine signatures with the forged ones, commissioned 3 weeks earlier through Attorney Han, and completed by an expert with 20 years of court experience. The interview lasted 90 minutes. By the end of it, the investigator had everything he needed, not to charge me, but to redirect the inquiry entirely toward the person who had commissioned the forgeries. As I left the building, a reporter caught me on the front steps. "Mrs. Cho, do you have a statement?" I paused. "I have nothing to hide," I said. "I never did." I got into the car. Attorney Park, my father's chief legal counsel, though nobody had connected this yet, sat beside me without expression. "They'll make the connection eventually," he said, "about who I work for." "I know," I said. "Let them." The fraudulent notary stamp was traced within a week. It led directly to a solicitor who had handled private legal matters for the Cho family for over 2 decades. He was cooperative with investigators from the first meeting. The kind of cooperation that comes when a man realizes the family he has protected for 20 years has left him fully exposed and entirely alone. His cooperation opened doors that led back to Madam Cho, with a directness that even Attorney Han described as unusually clean. Meanwhile, the public world was moving in its own direction. Madam Cho's social circle, the carefully assembled network of powerful families she had cultivated across 40 years, began quietly contracting. Husbands of her closest friends called their wives and explained that the Cho Association was becoming a problem. Invitations to Madam Cho stopped arriving. Calls went unanswered for the first time in her life. She called Sung-ho daily. He answered less and less. Then, on a Thursday night, the video appeared. Someone who had been seated 2 tables from us at the Grand Lotus Gala had recorded Madam Cho's speech on their phone, her voice clear and precise, her words perfectly audible, her face turned toward me with that practiced contempt. The clip was 40 seconds long. It was uploaded to 3 platforms simultaneously. By midnight, it had been viewed 400,000 times. The comments did not require my participation. The public, as it turned out, had very clear feelings about a woman who stands up in front of 50 people and dismantles her daughter-in-law for spilling soup. I did not watch the video. I read the message from the person who had filmed it. I was there. "I'm sorry I didn't speak that night. I should have." I replied, "Thank you for speaking now." Sung-ho watched the video alone in his study. He watched it 4 times. I know this because our daughter mentioned the next morning that her father had been in his study very late. I know the rest because he told me himself later, when telling the truth was all he had left to offer. He said that the fourth time he watched it, he wasn't watching his mother. He was watching himself. The moment he turned to me, the precise expression on his face, the exact cadence of those two words. Apologize, Mi-Rae. He said watching it from outside, as a stranger would, was like being shown a photograph of yourself doing something you cannot explain. Madame Cho called her public relations firm. They told her there was nothing to be done when the source material was the subject's own clearly recorded voice. She called Sung-ho instead. He did not answer. The video spread through every major Korean platform, every family drama community, every discussion thread about daughter-in-law treatment. By the weekend, Madame Cho's name and face and words had become a reference point, the kind of sharp, specific example that people reach for when making an argument. My phone received messages from strangers, hundreds of them, then thousands. Most were kind. Some were people who recognized themselves in the story, which moved me more than the kindness did. Amid all of them, one message sat separately in my mind, not from a stranger, but from a number I didn't immediately recognize. The phrasing was careful and familiar in a way that took me a moment to place. Then I recognized it as the way my father's people wrote when they were being precise. The message said, "The journalist who covers financial news, Lee Soo-jin. She is pulling a thread. It will lead somewhere. Be ready." Lee Soo-jin was thorough and fair, which made her far more dangerous than a careless journalist. She had been covering the Cho Group financial story for a week when she noticed something unusual in the quality of legal representation peering quietly around my case. The lawyers were too senior. The kind of seniority that costs money most private individuals do not have, unless they are connected to someone who does. She did not accuse. She observed. She traced corporate registry connections carefully, following ownership chains through holding companies and subsidiaries until she reached a name she recognized. She published one careful sentence. Sources suggest Mrs. Cho Mi-Rae may have family connections to a significantly more powerful network than the Cho family was aware of at the time of marriage. That sentence moved through Seoul's business community in 4 hours. My father called me that evening. His tone was the same as always, unhurried, completely controlled. But underneath it, I could hear something I had rarely heard from him in my adult life. "People are asking questions," he said. "I know. Are you ready for them to find the answer?" I thought about 3 years of the beige dress and the far end of the table and the word apologize. I thought about Owen asleep with her stuffed bear, completely unaware of all of it. I thought about the woman I had been before I learned to make myself small. "Yes," I said. That evening, Sung-ho came to find me in the garden. I was sitting outside with Owen, watching her draw in her sketchbook. He stood at the garden door for a long time. Then he said, "Mi-Rae, who is your father?" I looked at him. "Come inside," I said. "I'll tell you." I told him enough. I did not tell him everything. Some things about my father's world are not mine to share, and some things Sung-ho did not need to know in order to understand what mattered. But I told him enough for the color to leave his face slowly, steadily, the way light leaves a room at the end of the day. I spoke without cruelty. I was not performing. I was simply being finally, completely honest with my husband about the thing I had kept from him, not because I was ashamed of it, but because I had wanted to be loved as myself, not as my father's daughter. "Everything that has happened to your company," I said carefully, "happened because your family broke the law. Your mother forged my signature. She commissioned fraudulent legal documents. The financial crimes were real and documented long before my father became involved. He shared what he knew with the right people. He did not create the situation. Your family did." Sung-ho was sitting on the garden step. He looked at his hands. "I sat next to her at that table," he said quietly. "I handed you to her every time." "Yes." I said, "Apologize." "Yes." He looked up. His eyes were red. "I'm sorry, Mi-Rae. I know it's nowhere near enough, I know that, but I'm sorry." I looked at him for a long time. "I know," I said. "I believe you." Then my phone rang. It was Attorney Han. "The prosecutor is ready to move on the forgery and fraud charges," she said. They're asking whether you want to be listed as a formal complainant. I looked at Sung-ho. He looked at the ground. I'll call you back tomorrow, I said. I gave myself 24 hours, and I used all of them. I walked through every room of that house the next morning after Sung-ho left and Ahn went to school. I moved slowly, deliberately, the way you move through a place you are saying goodbye to. The kitchen where I had cooked 3 years of meals. The hallway where I had learned to take up less space. The bedroom where I had sat alone counting the hours between Ahn's fever checks. I was not angry. Anger had burned off somewhere in the past few weeks, replaced by something quieter and more definitive. I called Attorney Han. File it, I said. The forgery and the fraud, I'll be a complainant on both. And the gala incident. The public handled that, I said. I don't need to. And the divorce. I paused, not from doubt. From the weight of it, the simple, enormous weight of ending something that had been real once, even if it became something else. File it, I said. Then I called my father. We spoke for a long time, longer than usual, unhurried, ranging across things that had nothing to do with lawyers or investigators. He told me about a recent trip. I told him about something Ahn had said that made me laugh so hard I spilled my tea. At some point during the conversation, without planning it, I started laughing at something he said, a real laugh, completely unguarded, the laugh of a person setting down a very heavy thing. When we hung up, I went to Ahn's room and sat in the small chair beside her bed and simply breathed for a while. Then I prepared myself for what came next. Madam Cho called me directly on a Wednesday afternoon. I did not expect it. I let it ring twice, then answered. She spoke for the first 4 minutes without pause, methodical, composed, running through what she was offering. A public retraction of her comments at the gala. A formal statement expressing regret. Financial support for my transition, as she put it. All of this in exchange for my withdrawal from the criminal complaint. I listened to all of it. What I heard underneath the words was a woman who had never in 60 years apologized to anyone and did not know how to begin. She used the word sorry once, quickly, in the middle of a longer sentence, embedded in a conditional clause. It was the sorriest sorry I had ever heard, the kind that means please stop, not I was wrong. When she finished, I waited a moment. Then I said, Madam Cho, there is a difference between apologizing because you understand you caused harm and apologizing because the harm has come back to find you. You've offered me the second kind. I hope one day you find the first. Then I told her the complaint would stand. I put down the phone. I sat with the silence for a moment. Something had settled, not triumphantly, but cleanly. The way a room settles after the furniture has finally been arranged right. Attorney Han called an hour later. She's going to challenge it. Let her, I said. Mi-Rae, Attorney Han paused. You should know you've already won. Whatever happens next, the outcome is decided. I just want you to know that before it gets noisier. I know, I said. I've known for a while. My father asked me to have dinner with him. Just the two of us, no lawyers, no plans. He chose a small restaurant in a neighborhood I hadn't visited since childhood. It had no sign outside. The owner recognized my father without any visible acknowledgement, the kind of recognition that lives in a slight straightening of the back. We were shown to a private room at the back. He ordered the dish I had loved at 14 without asking. We ate for a while without speaking, which was comfortable in the way that only very old silences are comfortable. Eventually, he set down his chopsticks and asked what I wanted, not what I needed, not what the lawyers recommended, what I, Mi-Rae, his daughter, wanted from the rest of this and from my life going forward. I told him about the interior design work I had been studying quietly, reading books, taking online courses, filling notebooks I kept at the back of the art supply cabinet. I told him about the apartment I had found near a good school. I told him I wanted to build something that was entirely mine, not built on his name or Sung-ho's name, just mine. I told him I wanted Ahn to grow up watching her mother choose herself. He listened to every word without redirecting, without suggesting, without the subtle guidance I had seen him apply to every other conversation in my life. He simply listened. When I finished, he nodded once and said, "Then that is what happens." I smiled. "You can't just decide everything, Father." He picked up his chopsticks. "I know, but I can decide the restaurant." We were still laughing when we left, and when we stepped outside, I saw Sung-ho standing by the car. He had come alone. He was standing in the quiet street looking at my father, really looking, for the first time, at the man his family had dismissed as nobody for 3 years. My father is not physically imposing. He is a small, unremarkable-looking man in a plain coat who holds his daughter's arm with careful, practiced love. They looked at each other for a moment. Then my father spoke. He did not threaten. He did not demonstrate power or call attention to what he could do. He spoke the way men speak when they have nothing to prove. "She gave you 3 years of her loyalty," he said. "Real loyalty, the kind that costs something. You spent it making her smaller. I didn't intervene because she asked me not to. I want you to understand what that means. Not my restraint, hers." Sung-ho looked at the ground. My father turned to leave. Then, without turning back, he said, "Care for my granddaughter well. That is the only thing I will ever ask of you. It is also the only warning you will ever receive from me." He got into the car. Director Woo closed the door. I looked at Sung-ho. He looked at me. His eyes were tired and honest in a way they hadn't been in a long time. I thought about the man who had remembered small things. I thought about what 3 years of choosing his mother over me had cost both of us. I thought about Awen's laugh in the garden. "Be her father," I said. "Whatever else happens, be her father." He nodded. He couldn't speak. I got into the car with my father and we drove away. Through the rear window, I watched Sung-ho stand alone in the empty street for a long time. Then he took out his phone. From the look on his face, I knew he was calling Awen. That was enough. 6 months later, I no longer woke up thinking about any of it. That is how I knew I was healed, not when I stopped being angry, but when I stopped revisiting. When the gala and the soup and the dress became simply things that had happened, not things that were still happening. Madame Cho received a suspended sentence and a significant fine. 2 properties were sold to meet the financial penalties. She did not attend the sentencing hearing. I heard she had moved to a smaller apartment in a different district. I did not look for further details. I did not need them. Cho Group was restructured. Sung-ho remained as a minority shareholder in a company that was now genuinely smaller and genuinely solvent. He was quieter. He was present in Awen's life in ways he had never been before: school pickups, sick days, Sunday mornings. He never once asked me to reconsider the divorce. I think he understood, finally, that some things cannot be repaired, and that asking someone to repair them anyway is just another form of taking. Clara's family faced separate legal proceedings. That story belonged to other people. I signed the lease on a bright apartment near Awen's school on a Tuesday morning in March. I carried the first box in myself, books, mostly, and Awen's art supplies from the cabinet. My interior design practice started with one client, a friend of attorney Han's who needed her living room reconsidered. Then 2 more. Then 5. By the 6th month, I had more work than I could manage alone and had begun thinking seriously about who I might bring on. My father had dinner with us every other Sunday. He and Awen played cards together. He lost every single game with such complete and dignified sincerity that Awen never once suspected he was letting her win. One evening in autumn, Awen looked up from her drawing and said, "Iyama, are you happy?" I looked at her. I looked at our small, bright kitchen and the drawings pinned to the wall and the evening light coming through the window. I thought about everything it had taken to get from there to here. "Yes," I said, "I really am." And for the first time in a very long time, the answer required no thought at all. She didn't set out to bring them down. She simply stopped holding them up and let the truth do what truth always does when patient people finally let it speak. Before we close, there is something this story teaches that goes far beyond one woman's journey, and it is worth sitting with. Mi-Rae was never powerless. She was simply strategic in a way her enemies completely failed to understand. There is a profound lesson in that distinction. The people who humiliated her publicly, Madame Cho, and a husband who chose silence over protection, made the most dangerous mistake that arrogant people make. They looked at a quiet person and decided that quiet meant empty. They saw a woman who did not fight back loudly and concluded she had nothing to fight with. She had everything. She had documentation. She had patience. She had a mind that worked carefully behind a face that gave nothing away. She understood something that many people learn too late, that reacting in the moment of humiliation is rarely where the real power lives. Real power lives in what you do in the quiet days that follow, the calls you make, the evidence you gather, the professionals you find, the boundaries you decide on when nobody is watching. There is also a lesson here about the nature of silence in relationships. Sung-ho's silence, his choice, night after night, to say nothing while his mother dismantled his wife, was not neutral. Silence in the face of cruelty is never neutral. It is a vote. It is a choice dressed up as passivity. Mi-Rae understood this. She did not hate him for it, but she did not excuse it either. And in the end, she did something that many people in painful relationships struggle to do. She separated clearly between forgiving a person and staying with them. Those two things are not the same. You can release your anger and still choose your freedom. You can wish someone well from a great distance. There's a lesson, too, in the way Mi-Rae's father operated. Chairman An did not ride in with noise and force. He shared truth with people positioned to act on it. He trusted institutions, a prosecutor with integrity, a journalist with standards to do their work. His power was not in what he destroyed, but in what he enabled. And the most important thing he enabled was his daughter's own agency. He did not rescue her. He stood behind her while she rescued herself. Perhaps the deepest lesson of all is about identity. Mi-Rae knew who she was throughout everything. 3 years of being called a pretty face from nowhere, of beige dresses and far-end seats and public apologies, none of it changed what she knew about herself privately. The humiliation landed. The pain was real, but it never reached the part of her that mattered most. That interior steadiness, the knowledge of your own worth that doesn't require anyone else's agreement, is something that cannot be taken from a person who has genuinely built it. Build it before you need it. That is the lesson. Know who you are, document what matters, choose people who can be trusted, and when the moment comes, and in many lives, some version of that moment does come, you will not be starting from nothing. You will be starting from everything you quietly prepared. Mi-Rae walked out of that marriage into her own life, not rescued, not vindicated by someone else's declaration. She walked out on her own 2 feet into a bright kitchen, a small business, a daughter who drew pictures at the table, and a father who lost at cards on purpose every Sunday. That is not a small life. That is a whole one. And that is where Mi-Rae's story ends, not with a dramatic finale, but with a quiet Tuesday morning, a signed lease, and a box of books carried through a door that was entirely her own. If this story moved you, if you felt Mi-Rae's patience, her pain, and her quiet, unbreakable strength, then you already know what this channel stands for. We tell stories of real endurance, hidden power, and the kind of justice that arrives not loudly but completely. Drop your location in the comments right now. Tell me what country, what city, what part of the world you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And tell me what you thought. What moment hit you hardest? Was it the gala, the old phone in the wardrobe, the night she finally made the call? Leave your honest review of this story in the comments, your real, unfiltered thoughts. This channel grows because of your voice, not just mine. If you are not yet subscribed, please do it now. It takes 1 second, and it means this kind of storytelling reaches more people who need to hear it. Share this video with someone in your life who needs a reminder today that quiet does not mean weak, and that the most powerful moves are often the ones nobody sees coming. Thank you for watching until the very end. That means everything. Until next time, stay strong, stay patient, and never let anyone convince you that your silence is surrender.